Why anything? Why this? Why does the universe exist? There are two questions here. First, why is there a universe at all? It might have been true that nothing ever existed. No living beings, no stars, no atoms, not even space or time. When we think about this possibility, it can seem astonishing that anything exists. Second, why does this universe exist? Things might have been, in countless ways, different. So why is the universe as it is? These questions, some people believe, may have causal answers. Suppose first that the universe has always existed. Some believe that if all events were caused by earlier events, everything would be explained. That, however, is not so. Even an infinite series of events cannot explain itself. We could ask why this series occurred, rather than some other series, or no series. Of the supporters of the steady state theory, some welcomed what they took to be this theory's atheistic implications. They assumed that, if the universe had no beginning, there would be nothing for a creator to explain. But there would still be an eternal universe to explain. Suppose next that the universe is not eternal, since nothing preceded the Big Bang. That first event, some physicists suggest, may have obeyed the laws of quantum mechanics by being a random fluctuation in a vacuum. This would causally explain, they say, how the universe came into existence out of nothing. But what physicists call a vacuum isn't really nothing. We can ask why it exists and has the potentialities it does. In Hawking's phrase, what breathes fire into the equations? Similar remarks apply to all suggestions of these kinds. There could not be a causal explanation of why the universe exists, why there are any laws of nature, or why these laws are as they are. Nor would it make a difference if there is a God who caused the rest of the universe to exist. There could not be a causal explanation of why God exists. Many people have assumed that since these questions cannot have causal answers, they cannot have any answers. Some therefore dismiss these questions, taking them to be not worth considering. Others conclude that they do not make sense, assuming that, as Wittgenstein wrote, doubt can exist only where there is a question, and a question only where there is an answer. These assumptions are, I believe, mistaken. Even if these questions could not have answers, they would still make sense, and they would still be worth considering. Some thoughts take us into the aesthetic category of the sublime, which applies to the highest mountains, the night sky, raging oceans, the interiors of some cathedrals, and other things that are superhuman, awesome, limitless. No question is more sublime than why there is a universe, why there is anything rather than nothing. Nor should we assume that answers to this question must be causal. And even if reality cannot be fully explained, we may still make progress, since what is inexplicable may become less baffling than it now is. One apparent fact about reality has recently been much discussed. Many physicists believe that, for life to be possible, various features of the universe must be almost precisely as they are. As one example of such a feature, we can take the initial conditions in the Big Bang. If these conditions had been more than very slightly different, these physicists claim, the universe would not have had the complexity that allows living beings to exist. Why were these conditions so precisely right? Some say, if they had not been right, we couldn't even ask this question. But that is no answer. It could be baffling how we survived some crash, even though, if we hadn't, we could not be baffled. Others say there had to be some initial conditions, and the conditions that make life possible were as likely as any others. So there is nothing to be explained. To see what is wrong with this reply, we must distinguish two kinds of case. Suppose first that, when some radio telescope is aimed at most points in space, it records a random sequence of incoming waves. There might be nothing here that needed to be explained. Suppose next that, when the telescope is aimed in one direction, it records a sequence of waves whose pulses match the number pi in binary notation to the first 10,000 digits. That particular number is, in one sense, just as likely as any other. But there would be something here that needed to be explained. Though each long number is unique, only a very few are, like pi, mathematically special. What would need to be explained is why this sequence of waves exactly matched such a special number. Though this matching might be a coincidence, which had been randomly produced, that would be most unlikely. We could be almost certain that these waves had been produced by some kind of intelligence. On the view that we are now considering, since any sequence of waves is as likely as any other, there would be nothing to be explained. If we accepted this view, intelligent beings elsewhere in space would not be able to communicate with us, since we would ignore their messages. Nor could God reveal himself. Suppose that, with some optical telescope, we saw a distant pattern of stars which spelled out in Hebrew script the first chapter of Genesis. On this view, this pattern of stars would not need to be explained. That is clearly false. Here is another analogy. Suppose first that, of 1,000 people facing death, only one can be rescued. If there is a lottery to pick this one survivor and I win, I would be very lucky. But there might be nothing here that needed to be explained. Someone had to win, and why not me? Consider next another lottery. Unless my jailer picks the longest of 1,000 straws, I will be shot. If my jailer picks that longest straw, there would be something to be explained. It would not be enough to say this result was as likely as any other. In the first lottery, nothing special happened. Whatever the result, someone's life would be saved. In this second lottery, the result was special, since of the 1,000 possible results, only one would save a life. Why was this special result also what happened? Though this might be a coincidence, the chance of that is only 1 in 1,000. I could be almost certain that, like Dostoevsky's mock execution, this lottery was rigged. The Big Bang, it seems, was like this second lottery. For life to be possible, the initial conditions had to be selected with great accuracy. This appearance of fine-tuning, as some calls it, also needs to be explained. It may be objected that, in regarding conditions as special, if they allow for life, we unjustifiably assume our own importance. But life is special. if only because of its complexity. Even a squirrel's brain is more complicated than a lifeless galaxy. Nor is it only life that requires this fine-tuning. If the Big Bang's initial conditions had not been almost precisely as they are, the universe would have either almost instantly recollapsed or expanded so fast and with particles so thinly spread that not even stars or heavy elements could have formed. That is enough to make these conditions very special. It may next be objected that these conditions cannot be claimed to be improbable, since such a claim requires a statistical basis, and there is only one universe. If we were considering all conceivable universes, it would indeed be implausible to make judgments of statistical probability. But our question is much narrower. We are asking what would have happened if, with the same laws of nature, the initial conditions had been different. This provides the basis for a statistical judgment. There is a range of values that these conditions might have had, and physicists can work out in what proportion of this range the resulting universe could have contained stars, heavy elements, and life. This proportion, it is claimed, is extremely small. Of the range of possible initial conditions, fewer than 1 in a billion billion would have produced a universe with the complexity that allows for life. If this claim is true, as I shall here assume, there is something that cries out to be explained. Why was one of this tiny set also the one that actually obtained? On one view, this was a mere coincidence. That is conceivable since coincidences happen. But this view is hard to believe since, if it were true, the chance of this coincidence occurring would be below 1 in 100 billion billion. Others say the Big Bang was fine-tuned. In creating the universe, God chose to make life possible. Atheists may reject this answer, thinking it improbable that God exists. But God's existence is much less improbable than the view that would require so great a coincidence. So even atheists should admit that, of these two answers to our question, the answer that invokes God is more likely to be true. This reasoning revives one of the traditional arguments for belief in God. In its strongest form, this argument appealed to the many features of animals, such as eyes or wings, that seem to have been designed. Pauli's appeal to such features much impressed Darwin when he was young. Darwin later undermined this form of argument, since natural selection can explain this appearance of design. But natural selection cannot explain the appearance of fine-tuning in the Big Bang. This argument's appeal to probabilities can be challenged in a different way. In claiming it to be most improbable that this fine-tuning was a coincidence, the argument assumes that, of the possible initial conditions in the Big Bang, each was equally likely to obtain. That assumption may be mistaken. The conditions that allow for complexity and life may have been, compared with all the others, much more likely to obtain. Perhaps they were even certain to obtain. To answer this objection, we must broaden this argument's conclusion. If these life-allowing conditions were either very likely or certain to obtain, then, as the argument claims, it would be no coincidence that the universe allows for life and complexity. But this fine-tuning might have been the work, not of some existing being, but of some impersonal force, or fundamental law. That is what some theists believe God to be. A stronger challenge to this argument comes from a different question to explain the appearance of fine-tuning. Consider first a similar question. For life to be possible on the Earth, many of the Earth's features have to be close as being as they are. The Earth's having such features, it might be claimed, is unlikely to be a coincidence, and should therefore be regarded as God's work. But such an argument would be weak. The universe, we can reasonably believe, contains very many planets, with varying conditions. We should expect that, on a few of these planets, conditions would be just right for life. Nor is it surprising that we live on one of these few. Things are different, we may assume, with the appearance of fine-tuning in the Big Bang. While there are likely to be many other planets, there is only one universe. But this difference may be less than it seems. Some physicists suggest that the observable universe is only one out of many different worlds, which are all equally parts of reality. According to one such view, the other worlds are related to ours in a way that solves some of the mysteries of quantum physics. On the different and simpler view that is relevant here, the other worlds have the same laws of nature as our world, and they are produced by Big Bangs that are broadly similar, except in having different initial conditions. On this many worlds hypothesis, there is no need for fine-tuning. If there were enough Big Bangs, we should expect that, in a few of these, conditions would be just right to allow for life and complexity. And it would be no surprise that our Big Bang was one of these few. To illustrate this point, we can revise my second lottery. Suppose my jailer picks a straw not once, but very many times. That would explain his managing, once, to pick the longest straw, without that being an extreme coincidence, or this lottery's being rigged. On most versions of the many worlds hypothesis, these many worlds are not, except through their origins, causally related. Some object that, since our world could not be causally affected by such other worlds, we can have no evidence for their existence, and can therefore have no reason to believe in them. But we do have such a reason, since their existence would explain an otherwise puzzling feature of our world, the appearance of fine-tuning. Of these two ways to explain this appearance, which is better? Compared with belief in God, the many worlds hypothesis is more cautious, since its claim is merely that there is more of the kind of reality that we can observe around us. But God's existence has been claimed to be intrinsically more probable. According to most theists, God is a being who is omniscient, omnipotent, and wholly good. The uncaused existence of such a being has been claimed to be simpler and less arbitrary than the uncaused existence of many highly complicated worlds. And simpler hypotheses, many scientists assume, are more likely to be true. If such a God exists, however, other features of our worlds would become hard to explain. It may not be surprising that God chose to make life possible, but the laws of nature could have been different. So there are many possible worlds that would have contained life. It is hard to understand why, out of all these possibilities, God chose to create our world. What is most baffling is the problem of evil. There appears to be much suffering, which any good person knowing the truth would have prevented if he could. If there is such suffering, there cannot be a God who is omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good. To this problem, theists have proposed several solutions. Some suggest that God is not omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good. Others suggest that undeserved suffering is not, as it seems, bad, or that God could not prevent such suffering without making the universe as a whole less good. We can ignore these suggestions here, since we have larger questions to consider. I began by asking why things are as they are. Before returning to that question, we should ask how things are. There is much about our worlds that we have not discovered. And just as there may be other worlds that are like ours, there may be worlds that are very different.